Good morning, students. Welcome to the class. In this class, I'll be discussing about the growth and sustainability, the basic constructs, what makes growth sustainable, and what are the basic principles behind it, and how one should progress towards that. That's precisely what we're going to discuss in the next 1 hour time. I am Professor Sudhakar Yedla, professor at ITIDR, Mumbai, and also former Vice-Chancellor of Dravidian University, Kuppam, in the state of Andhra Pradesh. When we try to see the link between the economic progression and the environment or the ecology in a larger context, it is important to understand that pre-industrialization time, the linkage between economy and ecology was not so much explored on. But then the origins of environmental economics lies in the early 60s, during the industrialization period, post-industrialization period, early 60s, with the first wave of modern popular green thinking in the developed countries. That was the origin of considering environment in the context of economic development. Then people started looking at economic systems as underpinned or assume that they cannot function without the support of ecological systems of plants, animals, and their interactions and interrelations. So based on that, it was the economy is portrayed as a system, like in order to function, for the economy, in order to function means produce output, basically. The economy needs to extract resources, which are basically raw materials and fuels, from the environment, process them, which means turn them into end products, and dispose the dissipated and or the chemically transformed material, which we call the waste somehow, back into the environment. So that's how the thinking, economic thinking of people has changed from not considering the underpinnings of the environment, and then they started considering underpinnings of the environment and ecology, and then redefine the economic model as such. So the redefined thing is, in order to function, economy needs to extract resources from the environment, process them, and then dispose the dissipated and the chemically transformed resources back into the environment. That's a new way of looking at the environment, at the economy with respect to the environment. So the unavailability of systems thermal energy as the material is extracted and used to produce things, and the usefulness of that material starts diminishing. So the unavailability of systems thermal energy for conversion into mechanical work is termed as entropy in chemical engineering terminology. So to put it simple, it's non-availability of systems energy, or systemic energy in the material. That means the usefulness of the raw material as it is used for production of end product. The entropy value keeps increasing. That means non-availability of useful energy in the material in this case starts, non-availability starts increasing. That means less and less usefulness of the material. So as we call it waste, but it's not actually waste, it's the resource with increasing entropy. That's basically, that's why we always try to redefine waste as resource, maybe less useful resource, right? So that brings the, the material balance perspective to the economy, and that forms a fundamental point for environmental economics. The material cannot be destroyed or diminished, it only transforms, changes its form into something else and moves forward. That's how the material balance perspective comes to fore. Now, if you look at the conventional economic models that we know, we involve firms and households, there is labor and capital services, which get wages and rents, interest and profits, etc. And the payment for produced goods and services is a closed cycle. Then the evolution of environmental economics, or considering the underpinnings of environment and ecology, economic models, they have introduced the environment into interaction there, as you can see. So the households and the firms equally interact with the environment. Firms do draw materials from the environment and put it back into the environment in the form of processed material, whereas environment households do discharge various types of waste into the environment. So environment do play a key role on the underpinning character of economic models in the modern thinking of economy. So that's how the changes started coming up. So the economy is portrayed in a modern context as an open system, not unlike the closed system earlier. It's an open system pulling in material and energy from the environment and eventually releasing an equivalent amount. That's where the mutual balance perspective comes in. Releasing an equivalent amount of waste back into the environment. So when we do that, too much of waste in a wrong place at a wrong time causes pollution and so-called external costs. So that's the linkage between economy and ecology. So economy has three processes that involve generation of waste products that eventually find their ways into the environment or the ecosystems as such. And those three processes are portrayed here. We have extraction of raw materials, basic processing of those raw materials, fabrication, and consumption. These are the different stages. Of course, consumption is not included as one stage. Extraction, basic processing, and fabrication are the three stages of manufacturing. Consumption is an add-on thing for that. As you can see, the zigzag lines here, they basically talk about primary material energy and energy inputs. There are I's there. The secondary inputs, which are basically recycled inputs. Then we have primary inputs for recycling and or modification process. And then on the waste side, we have WP, which defines residuals requiring disposal. Then secondary residual generated during treatment or recycling process. That is another set of thing. And of course, Q is the final production output as that. As you can see, waste generation happens at multiple stages of production process and that travels in different paths towards the environment. So environment is a waste receptor, and that leads to environmental damage. Because environment is being a waste receptor, that is subjected to a lot of damage there. So the economic process damages or tends to damage environment at different stages of the economic process. And of course, consumption also do add to a lot of environmental damages as well. So this is how they are interlinked. All three processes, as we have just discussed, extraction, production, fabrication, and consumption, involve generation of waste products, and eventually those waste products eventually find their way into the environment or ecosystem. So too much of waste in the wrong place, the wrong time causes pollution, and that eventually leads to external cost. Now here, one important point is worth noting for all of you is waste or deposition of some material that comes from the production process not necessarily causes pollution all the time. The conditions for any waste substance to cause pollution is it should be at the wrong place. If something is at the right place, that doesn't cause any problem. And it should be at the wrong time. So for example, a unit of chemical discharge into the air does not cause as much pollution as it would be in the case it is released into the atmosphere during this winter compared to summer. The same amount of chemical substance is discharged into the air during winter. It is more pollution causing because it remains there for longer time. It doesn't get dispersed. Whereas during summer, it quickly gets dispersed. So the same amount of discharge at a right time is not a pollution. At the wrong time, it is a pollution. At a right place, it is not a pollution if it is a city, coastal city, for example. The same amount of discharge may not cause as much problem compared to discharging that into a mountain area where the stagnation happens. So wrong place, depositing at a wrong place and at a wrong time. The third dimension is for long enough. The duration of the time is also important. These three aspects define the pollution. The same amount of emission not necessarily causes pollution unless these conditions are satisfied. So it's very important to understand that anything that we discharge doesn't eventually become pollution itself. Now, excessive waste, when we deposit excessive discharge into the environmental media, air, water, soil, it's their environmental media. Deposition of that and accumulation leads to contamination of the primary ecosystem. Now, all these three media, air, water, soil, these three have the primary ecosystem, which are like at a micro level, they keep working on the systemic performance there where self-cleansing happens. Water, for example, you drop a mug of water, a mug of polluted water into a large pool of water, natural water, not the bucket water. In a natural form, it gets digested because it has a primary ecosystem, the microorganisms, which actually eat on that pollution. And then natural digestive system kicks in there. That primary ecosystem will be affected once the deposition of waste reaches to contamination. Further accumulation of that waste substance into the ecosystem leads to pollution. That means the intensity of deposition is beyond contamination level that leads to pollution. Pollution means like high-end organisms, higher ecosystems like fishes, birds, other cattle, for example. These are the levels of pollution. You can say water is polluted, or air is polluted, oil is polluted. Further accumulation of waste material, or rather, leads to economic pollution. That's where people get affected. That's where human beings get affected. So, simple deposition of waste doesn't necessarily mean pollution, or presence of pollution doesn't necessarily mean economic pollution. Why are we talking about economic pollution? I'll tell you in a while, but it's a matter of fact. Summing it up, whatever we have discussed so far, we sum it up, we can see every single unit that we produce and every single unit that we consume. That means production and consumption that makes economic system. Those two, they have a footprint on the ecology and environment. Whatever we produce, we have to extract raw materials and process them. And consumption also has footprint, every one of them, on the ecology and environment. Because we draw material, we disturb the ecology, we put the waste back into the environment, we disturb the environment. Now, when we footprint, as we talk about, goes beyond the carrying capacity of the ecosystem, then we have pollution or destruction. So that's, in a nutshell, that's how economy and ecology are linked in that sense. So this is a kind of game changer perspective in that. This change in perspective is the root for the change in the rules of the game, where we started talking about environmental implications of economic performance. Till then, it was not the case. Now, if you define it, economic pollution that I mentioned just now, economic pollution is basically an uncompensated loss of human welfare. We can call it human well-being as well, due to the imposition of an external cost, which comes in the form of health damage, mortality, morbidity, less pleasurable recreational experience, for example. These are all the external costs, okay, that are related to the emissions of air or discharge to water, or onto land of waste substance. That essentially means it is an uncompensated loss of human welfare that is coming out of these so-called emissions into environmental media. The loss is in the form of external cost. So it can come from morbidity, it can come from mortality, it can come from loss of pleasurable experience of a natural ecosystem. Right. So this is economic pollution. So the presence of physical pollution doesn't necessarily mean there is an economic pollution. As we have discussed earlier, there is a sequential progression of deposition of waste material. The last stage is economic pollution. Now, as the production process goes on, there is a tendency of moving towards. Now that economic pollution actually plays back into the economy. So that was first kind of studied and presented as touched upon by Figo, the UK economist in 1920, which says that impact of pollution on the working of economy is what he postulated at the time. He explained that producing a unit of, say, paper, as you can see the graph here, the green line, let me start with yellow line. Yellow line is the marginal net private benefit of producing a paper up to the market optimality QM. So every single unit gives a profit, a positive net profit for the company. So he continued to produce up to QM under normal circumstances where only economy is considered without due consideration to environment or ecology. So the production cost of paper in that case is cost of labor less cost of material, keeping aside the capital investment. So you can say private cost of production of paper is cost of labor plus cost of material. But as the production happens, as the production level increases from origin to the production level QM, the external cost coming from this production, because a lot of material is extracted, a lot of waste is being deposited, the external cost increases. So the marginal external cost curve, the green line here, represents marginal external cost. That is a cost on the society because of the production that the firm is taking up. So as you can see, if the production continues up to QM, there is a tremendous amount of marginal cost. That is, we can say O prime, E prime, and E, the triangle under the line, green line there. So that's a huge loss. Society is worse off, depending on the slope. At QM production, the actual social well-being could be negative. I mean, if the slope of this line is steeper, slope of green line is steeper than the yellow line, the net could be negative, net well-being coming out of this particular economic activity. So then Figo postulated that the firm should take care of this external cost. As you can see, the dashed lines explain QS is the social optimality, is the point where the damage that happens because of production is equal to the net benefit that the firm gets. So any production of any unit on the right side of QS, you will find the benefits of producing that is AB, which is less than the cost of producing that. Social cost of producing that is AC, which is bigger. So it is not socially optimal to produce any unit on the right side of QS. But on the left side of QS, if you control the production further down to the left side of QS, the unit where the DE, for example, a unit produced on the left side of QS, it will have less social cost and more benefit to the firm, of course, but that becomes social benefit altogether. So the benefit of producing that unit is more than producing cost of producing that unit. Naturally, society is not better off moving on the left side of QS as well. So society is not better off on the right side of QS. It is also not better off on the left side of QS. So QS presents the social. So that's what Figo did mention about. So as you can see, pollution and economic pollution put together. I mean, to understand what pollution, what economic pollution is, so to say, private cost of paper production is cost of labor plus cost of material. Now add external cost to that, then you will have private cost of production plus social cost. That's the actual cost of production. which is much higher. So the market optimality is not social optimality of production at any time, as soon as you start considering environmental externalities. So redefining pollution, we can say an uncompensated loss of human welfare due to the imposition of external costs uh, related to the emission of waste substances into air, water, or land is basically the external cost that has to be compensated for, that has to be included in the production process to understand the actual well-being that is generated by this economic process. So a small caution here, physical pollution does not necessarily mean economic pollution, I will explain to you, but just to restate that once again, that's very important. Now, the economy draws resources from the environment and discharges the residue back into the environment that we have seen. And in the process, it derives social welfare. Then we assume that that's the as to social well-being. But in doing so, this particular estimation of social welfare, which is proved to be an overestimated substance in the absence of internalized externality. Why is that? If you don't consider external costs, the triangle, the area under the line, the green line in the previous graph, if you don't consider that cost and simply say that the area under the yellow line is the social well-being, the social welfare, that definitely is an overestimate because you have to subtract the area under the green line from the area under the yellow line to get actual social welfare. So it is an overestimate if you ignore the damage. So as the growth itself, the production process related to growth itself has an impact on the environment and so the well-being. What is optimal level to which we can do the extraction and derive social welfare? We did talk about QS, that's in case of individual firms. But when you talk about overall production of entire country, where should we actually draw the line so that the net becomes optimal? Net benefit, net gain, or net social welfare becomes an optimal at a society level. So we do understand we can't keep producing as much as we like because that also gives negative impact in the form of social and external cost. So there is always a limit. There is always a limit to what level we can extract. There is always a limit to what level we can produce. What is that limit? Yes, in the literature, there are people who did ponder about that. Malthusian limit to growth, way back 1798, it says the economy grows, so the population grows, and the population outgrows the means of subsistence. As we keep growing, the subsistence will become less and less, and that leads to a stationary state. So that he said there is always a limit because as population grows and the economy grows, it outgrows. And then in Ricardian limit to growth, 1817 is postulated. It says relative limits are scarce resources was a real problem for the growth. What does it mean? It actually limits are set by rising costs as a highest grade resource, which means the best agricultural land, purest mines, etc., which are explored first. They become exhaustive and have to be substituted by successfully lower grade resources, and exploration costs would go up. That means when you start exploring the resource, initially you get the best quality of resource and at relatively lesser expense. You know, simple analogy, if you have a pool of water with so much of fish in that, naturally harvesting and catching the fish is a lot easier. As you have to go deeper into the sea, it becomes more and more expensive, and the resource available there, quality of resource is also diminishing. So the same applies there. So that is the Ricardian principle, Ricardian limit to growth. So both of these two limits to growth invariably talks about resources scarcity. So usually growth, economic growth, of course, is based on resources and two types of resources. Invariably, one is renewable resources, the other is non-renewable resources. You can say exhaustible resources being fossil fuels and minerals like copper and other things. And renewable resources, of course, we have forests and fisheries. These are the kinds of examples for renewable resources. So as long as the growth is based on the resources, which is obvious, there is always a limit. Now, to these two limits, what Malthusian and Ricardian limits explain us is fairly above the resource available. But if you observe whatever we have discussed so far, there are two phenomena that are happening. One is extraction of resources, and the other is dumping back the used material. Malthusian and Ricardian does not consider that because at that time the underpinning of economic systems by ecological systems is not explored as much. So now, with those underpinnings, we get to see two different limits. One is limit to growth is basically one, first limit is resources availability, limit to growth, finite nature of exhaustible resources. And the second one is a waste receiving capacity limit, which is not, which was not postulated by any of those limits earlier. Because this also limits the ability of ecosystem to support the economic growth. So, for example, with increasing GDP, you have resources being extracted and increasing waste generation, because all three processes generate a lot of waste, three processes of economic system. So with increasing GDP and increasing waste generation, social well-being may actually be falling due to environmental pollution that we have seen a while ago. So just growth not necessarily mean the well-being is right. Because of environmental underpinning, actual well-being may be stagnant or it may be falling. So what is the sustainable level of development? So given that not only the limits to growth with respect to the resources, now limit to growth with respect to the waste receiving capacity of the ecosystem, what is the sustainable level of developing any country or the society? That's what the question comes. Now, the sustainable development has thousands of definitions. The one definition that is accepted now globally, the World Commission on Environmental Development accepted it as the definition of sustainable development. That's called development that meets the needs of the present without compromising, most of the people say, the needs of future generation. No, it is without compromising the ability of future generation to meet their own needs. Okay, so we should be able to leave them with ability to meet their own needs. So that essentially means both inter and intra-generational equity concerns must be addressed or met before any society can attain the goal of sustainability. That's basically the fundamental principle of sustainable development. So how one would measure the overall environmental performance whenever a country tries to develop? How do we see its impact or the performance of that country on environmental aspects? That comes out to be an important point, because that's what sustainable development is all about. You develop, but leave the future generations with sufficient ability to meet their own needs. That means do not damage the ecosystem to that extent, do not extract the resources to that extent that future generations would be unable to do whatever they want to do. So that means we need to understand the interaction between development and the environmental performance. What is the way to do that? There comes a concept, a phenomena called Quizness curve. Simon Kuznets' income disparity hypothesis, as you all must be aware by now, and its extension to environment. Kuznets' curve was not made for environment, it was made for economic growth and income disparity. But that was later used for explanation on the environmental aspect as well. So Simon Kuznets curve explained the relationship between per capita income and the income disparity to say how as income as country progresses economically, how the difference between rich and poor progresses, and then how it changes after some time. So the inverted U curve, which was empirically proved, explains the phenomenon of increasing income disparity with economic growth, and subsequently, because it's inverted U or bell-shaped curve, income disparity after attaining certain level of economic growth, income disparity start diminishing. So he got a Nobel for it in 1971. But 20 years later, in 1991, it was observed that certain measures of quality of life, which essentially link to environmental parameters, might initially deteriorate with economic progression, but then improves later. That was the thing observed empirically by a set of researchers in 1991. All right. So this is the environmental Kuznets curve, as we see here. There's an inverted shape, inverted U curve, which is also called bell-shaped curve. The rising part of this curve is called environmental decay curve. On the x-axis, we have per capita income. On the y-axis, we have environmental deterioration. And this is turning point income, and then followed by environmental improvement phase of EKC. So the typical environmental Kuznets curve would look like this. Now, the explanation for that, why environmental deterioration happens initially and then why it actually starts improving. There are two explanations presented in the literature. The first one is usually low levels of per capita income was in pre-industrial and agrarian economy, which is basically for subsistence. But the environmental damage increases due to greater use of resources. As any country embark onto economic progression by means of industrialization, so the environmental damage increases due to greater use of resources, the process of producing more, and operation of less efficient technology. As the country is not economically progressed, but embarking onto serious industrialization as a means to grow economically, they tend to use less efficient technology. So high priority is given for material output at that stage. They keep producing more and more using less efficient technology. So environmental deterioration happens. The economic growth continues in the process, and as the economy grows, life expectancy increases, and then clean water, clean air, they become more valuable as people make choices on how to spend their money because of their new economic status, they have choices to make. So as there is more demand for clean water, clean air, clean environment, then because of the increased or improved economic status of the country, more and more investments are also made because there is more demand for it. When there is a demand for it, it's always provided in a better way. So that comes as a result, environmental improvements start happening. And because the economic status is also better, industries also start putting better technology, clean technology in their production. So that's how environmental improvement happens. Another explanation presented in the literature for this environmental curve is in early stages of development, price of environmental goods, whatever resources that we're talking about, is very low because there's no market for that, almost like it's a public good, no pricing in many cases. So even if it is there, it is very low, and hence large amounts of that resource is used because it's very less priced or almost not. But with continued use of that resource, the resource becomes scarce, and hence the price of the good rises. Whenever the resource becomes scarce, naturally the price of that will start increasing. As the price is high, the resource use gets limited again, and hence the environmental deterioration ends. And of course, the rising prices of environmental goods can stem from the emerging market And property rights and other fundamental changes in the institution actually results in emerging market. In market, we need to have a perfect exchange of things. And for perfect exchange of things, the fundamental thing is to have a property rights well defined. So whenever such markets are created for these resources, which are becoming scarce, they need to be protected, and accordingly markets develop. And markets are basically developed because of fundamentally property rights are in place, institutions are in place. So this is a kind of property rights perspective of environmental Quizness curve that comes in the literature. All right. So as the economy grows, environment invariably has to suffer. That's the kind of lesson that we get from going through the entire thing. And of course, subsequently, it improves as economy reaches a certain level of maturity. All right. Okay. So when we look at the development of EKC, as I said, in 1991, Grossman and Kruger tried to analyze air quality measure in a cross section of countries in different years, and then they found this particular pattern of turning point is identified in the case of Mexico. And at the same time, Shafiq and Bandyopadhyay from the World Bank has also inquired into growth and environment for the bank's World Development Report in 1992. At the time, they also observed that such inversion of environmental deterioration happens with economic development of countries. So, of course, the literature says there is a the turning point income varies from pollutant to pollutant. For some pollutants, it is very deep on the economic growth. Say, for example, if you look at CO2, the EKC turning point was observed around $37,000 to $57,000, whereas it is observed at 9,600 to 11,600 for sulfur dioxide emissions as such. So it is possible to have varied turning points of EKC. So whenever there is development, there is an environmental deterioration. Of course, that happens. But then there is always a debate. To what extent should we develop? Or should we jeopardize development for the sake of environment? Should we give more priority for environment than development? This is an endless debate that happens, that has been happening for the last 30 years or so. So there are two ways, two distinct philosophies. One is grow first and then clean up later, which is like postulated by EKC. As the economy develops, first concentrate on growth, and then later you try to clean up the environment. Again, as that school of thought, there is another school of thought which says green growth. As you are growing, try to be greener. So the inverted U shape that we have, bell-shaped curve, that can be actually offset or chopped off in a way to make it absolutely flat, so that the growth continues, but the environmental deterioration does not actually go that high, but it will be flattened quite a bit. So that is a new approach. So these two schools of thoughts do make headlines in almost all meetings or deliberations that happen on development and the environment. The new climate regimes that we get to see are also towards green development model. Even to fight climate change, they do talk about green development models that runs parallel to poverty removal and food security. Of course, development is basically to control negative things in the society, such as poverty and food insecurity. So whatever regime that people embark on, whether green development model or grow first and clean up later, it is basically underpinned or runs in parallel to poverty reduction and food security as such. So for rapid but sustainable growth, any country must need to consider both resources and waste receiving limits to growth, as we have discussed earlier. They should adopt a material cycles approach to economic planning. That's very important. Green the national accounts, essentially meaning bring in all the environmental dimension or environmental services and environmental goods into national accounts that in a way internalizes the externalities that we talked about. Bring behavior and consumption pattern changes towards less carbon and energy footprint. So as you must have observed in the economic production process, not only production, but the consumption also has contribution towards the, environmental pollution. So bring behavioral changes towards consumption patterns towards less carbon and energy footprints. Ensure to have all the non-economic factors towards reducing the pollution and most importantly, achieve the peak of pollution sooner than business as usual. So it is invariably every country goes, the environmental deterioration happens as the economy picks up the development. But then make sure that you reach the peak at much earlier and at lesser intensity compared to business as usual scenario. That's what any country can possibly achieve in their development path. So when we talk about the sustainability, and of course we have gone through different limits to growth that stem from the environment as such. So in order to make the growth sustainable, right, there are different ways of it. It is a science of sustainability, I call it. There are general philosophy of sustainability. There are two. One on the philosophies of environmentalism, and two is based on systems approach. If you take the philosophies of environment as such, sustainability based on philosophies of environmentalism, there are two. One is strong sustainability principles, and the other is weak sustainability. See, what is strong sustainability principle? It basically says that the natural endowment, okay, I mean, in the development process, we cannot assume perfect substitution between capital endowment and nature. A small example, there is a woodland, a development oriented person will come and say, I will clean up this woodland and create a beautiful and income generating entity, may it be a central business district, whatever. And he says that actually creates opportunities for generations to come. So any development that doesn't jeopardize the ability of future generations to meet their needs is sustainable. So he says, I create this capital endowment and I assume perfect substitution of that to natural endowment. That is the argument of a development side, a development-oriented person. So the strong sustainability principle says that we cannot assume a perfect substitution of capital endowment to natural. We cannot. Some services that are offered by natural endowment are priceless and irreplaceable. So we must ensure to keep those intact. Weak sustainability principle essentially says human capital can substitute natural capital. So it is also sustainable development. Because as I said, I create a kind of resource which can ensure the ability of future generations to meet their needs. So according to sustainable development definition, that is also sustainable. So it depends. In the world, there are many people who embark onto weak sustainability principle because that is also sustainable development. And there are sections of people who embark onto strong sustainability principle that is also sustainable development, but in a different context. So these two, there is always a debate and fight between these two schools of thought that happens in every country. It happens in India as well. So there is another approach, as we said, sustainability based on systems approach. What is that? Systems approach has two components. One is internal sustainability, the other is external sustainability. In order for a system to be called sustainable, we need to ensure we have both internal sustainability condition met and external sustainability condition. What is that? Sustainability refers to sustaining a system. Okay, so it is systems approach. Now, if you consider city as a black box, one way is to treat the system as a black box. Let us say city is a black box, where the internal mechanism is not dealt with. Whatever is happening inside that, I'm not very concerned. It's a black. It is dealt with input-output matrix. The outer environment be able to support the supply needs, and again the outer environment is able to accept whatever comes out of that black box as waste. As long as these two conditions are met, I can say my system is sustainable. I'm not worried about what's happening inside the black box. It's a black box. So as long as there is sufficient coming in, sufficient material coming in, and as long as there is the ability of the environment to take what is coming out of the black box, I say my system is sustainable. Of course, in this both the limits that we talked about, resource availability limit and waste receiving capacity, both will keep it. They control certain effort, sustainability. The other way is to improve systemic efficiency. There is another way is to improve the systemic efficiency within the black box. And conditions required for such improvement are termed as internal conditions of sustainability or internal sustainability. One, the black box has to be efficient. If black box performs in an efficient way, sustainable way, that is the internal condition. Taking this black box as black box, I don't know what's happening inside. Let material come in, let material go out. As long as these two are there, I'm sustainable. That's external sustainability. But as you must have realized, targeting the criteria of external sustainability alone would not help sustain the system, because the limited availability of these two, both limits of receiving, limits of accepting the waste, both will not make the system sustainable. And hence, the human systems, the black box, needs to adapt itself to the endowments of the natural environment. So we need to make the system efficient and also try to augment the endowments of resources. Try to draw less resource, try to send less waste out. Trying to draw less resource and trying to send less waste is basically making the system more efficient. That internal sustainability. So as you can see here, the black box, within this black box, whatever happens is basically internal sustainability. Resources in and resources out lead to external sustainability. Factors limiting external sustainability is a resources availability limit. Economies based on non-renewable and exhaustible resources are greatly limited in their growth because of that. Waste receiving limit to growth, again it says certain resources, even if they are renewable, such as nuclear, would face this limitation from the environment, waste receiving limit to growth. So societies need to reinvent themselves as material cycle society based on recycling principles. That's what where is that? Okay. All right. So you invariably have to embark onto recycling of material, recycling principles, so that you don't draw too much of material, raw material from the environment, and you don't throw too much of waste material into the environment. That's basically the material cycle society principle. So that's about external sustainability. The internal sustainability, as we talked about, the system performance. The drivers of change is basically, as we have postulated here, there are three spheres of economy, social, and environment. All of you must have seen it at some point in time in your life. But what important to notice here, the internal sustainability is basically stems from the interactions between these spheres, the intersection areas. The interaction between economic sphere and social sphere leads to distributive efficiency, and the interaction between economic sphere and the environment sphere leads to long-term allocation efficiency, and interaction between social and environment sphere leads to environmental environmental equity. Right? So distributive efficiency, long-term allocation efficiency, and environmental equity. So the condition for internal sustainability is the positive externalities coming out from these interactions should be larger than the negative externalities resulting from this interaction. Okay, so the moment we have such distributive efficiency happening, such long-term allocation efficiency happening, and environmental equity happening, we can call that system as sustainable internally. So the distributive efficiency, as you all must be knowing this, distributive efficiency occurs when goods and services are consumed by those who need them the most. Yeah. So, for example, if a millionaire already has 3 cars, but he gets a fourth car, marginal utility doesn't increase much. This fourth car would not increase marginal utility at all. If someone on a low income is able to get their first car, the marginal utility will be much higher. So basically, that's what exactly it says. So to be distributively efficient, society will need to ensure an equitable distribution of resources. That's essentially the law of diminishing marginal return is the underlying principle there, which says that consumption of a good increases, we tend to get diminishing marginal utility. So we ensure that we have efficiency of distribution of resources, equitable distribution of resources. That's what is distributive efficiency. And long-term efficiency is a state of the economy in which production represents consumer profit. We produce more, which is of greatest preference. In particular, every good or service is produced up to the point where the last unit provides a marginal benefit to the consumer equal to the marginal cost of producing it. For example, production of cars that are in a great demand, producing more cars which have less demand is inefficient allocation of resources. So if we ensure long-term allocation efficiency is there, then system can be said it's internally sustainable. So environmental equity, when it comes to, is basically we should avoid disproportionate burden of environmental damage on different sections of the society. So equitable sharing of environmental impact by a community is what exactly is there. Development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental policy and laws to ensure that no group in a society or community in a society is made to bear a disproportionate share of the harmful effects. So, for example, we should not locate landfills only in the areas where lower economic status people live there. All the impacts of landfill sites are borne by those people living by. Usually on the outskirts, only low economic status people stay there, and upper strata in the society are never located. Or rather, we can say landfill is never located in the rich areas of the city. It is always located in the poorer areas. That is inequitable distribution of environmental impact. As long as this is happening, we cannot say internally the system is sufficient. So we have to ensure that. So example of development of roadways ignoring NMT pathways is another example, because poor people walk to their work, and our roads are made only to cars and bikes, not for walkers. Our footpaths are so narrow and mostly occupied by vendors and all that. So this is inequitable. Environmental equity is not practiced. So in order for a system to have internal sustainability condition met, we need to have all these resource allocation efficiency, long-term resource allocation efficiency, distributive efficiency also should be ensured, and environmental equity also has to be ensured there. So the positive externalities coming out of these interactions has to outweigh the negative externalities that may be coming from these interactions. So this is a kind of condition for internal sustainability as such. So what defines the degree of sustainability? Essentially connecting external sustainability, which is basically input-output matrix-based approach, to the internal sustainability criteria. It shows the marginal flow through the city. Okay, that means the material flow through the city essentially means the external sustainability condition where material comes in and waste goes out, and internal sustainability criteria where the system becomes more efficient by means of distributive efficiency, long-term resource allocation efficiency, and environmental equity. These two put together explains the material flow through the city, the efficient movement of material through the city. So linear metabolism of cities is one way, it just goes, and circular metabolism of cities is another. Now, in the linear metabolism of cities, where the input of the system is unrelated to the output of the system, which is thrown away. The output is thrown away as it comes out of it. So it is a linear system. And in circular metabolism, every output can also be used as input, either within their system or in another system. I'll show you the example here. As you can see, linear metabolism, resources come in, they get used there, they just go out as waste. It is a linear system. It is inefficient because there's no recycling of things. In the circular metabolism approach, we have resources coming in to the system uses them, and some of it goes out to the environment, and some gets recycled within the system. Okay, resources recycled within the system, and some going out will be used as input in another system as input. So this is more efficient way of using resources than the linear metabolism. That's why circular metabolism is considered to be a carrier for sustainable development. So as you can see here, the external sustainability is resources coming in, resources going out, and this is internal sustainability. And there is a concept called stage model that explains the environmental transformation that happens with economic development of any country, which is based on industrial growth pattern. So in such transformation, environmental problems are categorized into poverty-related environmental issues, production-related environmental issues, and consumption-related environmental issues, and then followed by ecocity stage, where the problems are much milder. Now, when you link this internal sustainability and external sustainability today, now here, most of the times, poor countries are countries with low economic power or at the poverty level. Countries which are progressing economically are at production this level, and countries which are matured economies are usually on the third inverted U here. So developing countries, which are kind of in this stage 1, stage 2, would invariably have to address the production efficiency. That means we are talking about the internal sustainability condition, because if we take black box as a production unit, production efficiency is what is to be concentrated by the developing countries, and consumption categories, like in problems related to consumption patterns, happens in industrialized countries. So they have to work on how to reduce the resource consumption, and so that and also where that is going on. So industrialized countries have to focus on external sustainability conditions more than internal sustainability conditions, because their production systems are already efficient. Their black boxes are already efficient. But they have a problem of more consumption of resources, more generation of waste. They have to work on it. That is their role play. Whereas developing countries, they have to concentrate more on internal sustainability because their systemic inefficiency is so high. So they need to ensure that the internal sustainability conditions improve. Their focus has to be more on that. At the same time, of course, they can work on external sustainability conditions, but their prime focus would be and has to be on internal sustainability conditions. So if you look at the role play, basic component, here, the role play here, industrialized countries have to address external sustainability conditions, and industrializing countries or developing countries have to ensure internal sustainability conditions with more priority as such. Okay, and of course, whenever somebody wants to progress towards sustainable development of a city, the literature essentially brings in, there are 4 components of sustainable city. Whenever somebody wants to attempt implementing a sustainable. So the concept of eco-city has evolved from there. Eco-city development is a healthy process towards sustainable development within the carrying capacity of local ecosystems through change of production mode, consumption behavior, both are very important, and decision instruments based on ecological economics and systems engineering. That's what is ecosystem development as such. And 5 evolutionary components, goals to bring ecocity into practice. Whenever somebody wants to practice ecocity, I mean, develop a city into an ecocity or develop a new ecocity altogether, one has to address these 5 components. One, ecological sanitation, ecological security, ecological efficient landscape, and ecologically oriented culture, eco-culture they call it, and eco-industrial production or ecologically efficient industrial production. So these are the 5 components one should focus. Yeah, in order to ensure that we are approaching towards eco-city. So eco-city principles, there are drivers of change. We have eco-efficient production and ecologically efficient consumption put together forms eco-efficient cities there. As I said, there are 5 components: ecologically efficient landscape, ecologically efficient production, ecologically efficient sanitation, ecologically efficient culture, and eco-security as such. That forms the components of eco-city. Finally, role play in sustainability, as you can see, improve the system's efficiency towards resource conservation and pollution reduction and less waste generation. That means internal improve the system's efficiency. Then increase the endowment of resources by tapping new methods and methodologies of resources. Like try to get more and more resources involved. Right? That's also very important to ensure sustainability. Developing countries have to play differential roles towards the same objective of resource conservation. As I said, industrialized countries have to concentrate on external sustainability condition more, and then industrializing countries or developing countries must concentrate on improving their internal sustainability conditions. So attempt both production level and consumption level measures towards sustainability. It is important to address both production and consumption aspects of the society in order to ensure the sustainable development is actually happening. So, by concluding, there should be a philosophy to choose to ensure sustainability, whether you are embarking onto stronger sustainability principles or weaker sustainability principles, or you want to get onto systems approach to ensure sustainability. The interaction among the 3 key spheres like social, economic, and environment, it holds the key for sustainability. Because as you must have seen, the 3 important components like that we have discussed that emerges from the interaction of these things: distributed efficiency, long-term allocation efficiency, and environmental equity. If we ensure those 3 and augment what do you call that? Circular metabolism approach, where things are not just coming in and going out. There is a recycling that happens within the system and also with other systems. It is possible to actually think of developing sustainability in economic growth or integrating sustainability in economic growth. So attempting to develop eco-cities is an operational step towards achieving sustainability. So when we work on these 5 components of eco-cities with the principles of systems, with the principle of systems approach, with internal sustainability and external sustainability embodied, with circular metabolism as underlying principle, it is indeed possible to work towards sustainable cities and hence sustainable development. I think I have this much to share with you all today. I hope you have learned something new listening to this 1.5 hour lecture. And in case if you have any confusion, if you want to discuss anything further on what I have discussed in the class today, you're free to contact me on email. My email address is given in the beginning of the lecture. I once again give it to you. It is Sudhakar, Sudhakar, Sudhakar @igidr.ac.in. You're most welcome to approach me for any further clarification on topics that I have explained today. I wish you all the best with the course that you're going through, and take care. Thank you and bye-bye.